And we are going to jump into this session of training your team for relaunch. So first of all, thank you everybody for being here. If you're just joining us, we're asking everybody to put their location and your work location and your physical location, like where you are located, in the chat box, just so you kind of have a record of everybody that's on the call today. Also, if you are not muted, go ahead and mute. Everybody should have been muted on the when you entered, but just in case you got unmuted, go ahead and keep yourself muted unless you're actually speaking. That will kind of help keep the noise down a little bit. So today we are talking about training your team for relaunch, and I have to be honest, this is actually a really exciting session for me to be able to present. Number one, because I get to see so many great people from the industry, and this is going to be really exciting. It's also really exciting because training is one of my absolute favorite topics. So to talk about training for an hour, it's just super exciting. But then also because we're also talking about relaunching, right? We wouldn't be doing this webinar if it wasn't time to kind of get ready to reopen. And I know a lot of different people are in different places in your reopening strategy. Maybe you're just thinking about it. Some people have actually already opened. Some places are, kind of in that process of getting ready to open. And of course, one of the biggest parts of that opening process or that opening plan is your team members. How do you get them to be productive? How do you get them to follow your new procedures? How do you get them to be excited to come back? That's one of the big question marks. So we're going to go through this webinar. We've got an hour to do so. If you have any questions or anything that you'd like to talk about afterwards, I'm happy to stay on the call afterwards. But if there's also questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll cover those. So again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and put your location and your facility and your location in the chat box. While those are still coming in, I will go ahead and do some logistics for today's webinar. Number one, if we haven't met before, my name is Matt Heller, and I'm the founder of a company called Performance Optimist Consulting. I largely work with people on this call, right? We work together to make sure that the leaders in this industry have all the tools and resources and skills that they need to be successful. I wasn't always in the consultant world. Many of you know that I've spent many years in operations and human resources at different places around the country. Really, it was my love of the business and love of training that got me into starting my own company back in 2011. And before all of my sessions, I really do like to share all of my contact information, because not only for this session do I want to be a resource and be able to provide you with some information, but I also really want to make sure that you can contact me afterwards if you have questions about this webinar. If there's anything that is going on in your world that you just need a listening ear or someone that can maybe help you kind of talk through something, I'm glad to be that person for you. So you've got my email, you've got my cell phone number right there. You've got all my socials. So go ahead and find me on any of the socials. I would also say, again, that is my cell phone number. So if you've got a question that you don't necessarily want to ask the group, but you want to talk to me about, or you want to follow up later, feel free to go ahead and text that question to me, and we'll follow up afterwards and make sure your question gets answered. So as I also mentioned in the email that I sent out just before the call, we're going to be doing a little experiment today. So something I haven't done with a group this large, but we're going to be using the breakout rooms that are here in Zoom. I've done this with a very small group, but there's some things that I'd love for you guys to be able to brainstorm about and maybe get some input from other people. So a little bit later on, I'll be breaking you up into smaller breakout rooms, and quite frankly, we'll see how it goes. I think that it'll be fun. I think you'll get to meet and interact with some people, and it'll be a kind of a way to kind of break up our time together too. So with that, I want to go ahead and jump right in with both feet head first, however you want to say it, into our content today about focusing on relaunching and how we really train our team members to be ready for that process. So one of the things that I really appreciate that everybody did was when you registered, you gave me what one of your biggest challenges was. And so I took all of them and I put them into a word cloud, if you will. So if you look at the screen, if you're watching, you can see that these are all the things that you guys put in the or answered the question, and these are the things that you're really concerned about. These are your challenges. And you can see that one of the biggest things is new, right? How are we going to get people to learn and follow these new procedures? That was a big trend that I saw when I looked through all those things. Also, time being a big one. I think so often we look at our training and say, we've only got a finite amount of time and we've got to get all this information in. Well, I'm actually going to encourage you to try to elongate that time and look at training a little bit differently. Our businesses are all going to be operating much, much different than they did in the past. So I think our training probably needs to change as well. You're also seeing that training is a big concern. Like, how do we get this information to our teams? We've got, thousands of people that we need to get this information to. How do we do that in an effective way? And so part of what we want to talk about today is really some fundamental training processes that you may be doing well, you may need to tweak, you may be able to execute a little bit better, but really understanding how we can use the entire process to make sure that your team members are getting the information they need, that they're following up, that they're feeling comfortable. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're training someone on how to cook a pot of spaghetti, or you're training them on how to wipe down a ride, after a ride cycle. Based on your new guidelines, it's all tasks, it's all skills that we can train people on. And so we don't want to lose sight of some of those fundamentals. I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that, let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Let's take a look at those things that we already do well and apply those new standards to it. Not necessarily look at, okay, well, we've got to do everything completely new. That's not necessarily the case, right? There's some new protocols, new procedures, but that doesn't mean that we have to change completely everything that we do. Now, we do have an opportunity to maybe enhance things that we're doing, and we'll certainly get into all that. A couple of the other things that I definitely see that are big concerns here, obviously distancing, right? I think somebody put in the challenge, how do you do lifeguard training, when you're socially distanced, or something that Eric Beard and I talked about the other day, how do you check a ride restraint when you are distanced from someone? That's obviously a big thing. Staff, making sure that people feel comfortable. We'll definitely talk about that today. And then also, you see maintaining and consistent. I think that's a big concern for a lot of people. How do we maintain these things, going through our season? How do we stay consistent? Understanding that we're going to be under new and tighter scrutiny probably than we ever have before, because everybody is looking at our standards, everybody's looking at our procedures, and whether they know specifically what we're supposed to be doing or not, they're looking at it with a more trained eye than they ever have before. So that's one thing that we have to really be concerned with, is how do we maintain this? How do we stay consistent? So one of the big umbrella topics that I want to make sure that we're all really clear on has to do with just training itself, right? And the fact that training in and of itself is a process, it's not an event. And really, when we look at how we get information to people and how we train people, a lot of times when we look at an event, it's a finite event. It's a one-time thing, and you probably are trying to put as many things into that as you can, because that's the only time that you're going to have your people there, right? Well, when we look at a process, this is potentially a longer process, but that also means that we're including more and more people. And I think that's especially true right now when we think about all the people that have to be involved in training your new team members. It's not going to be enough to bring your team members in, put them in a room for 2 hours, and send them out to their location. This is a process that has to include absolutely everybody. Your managers, your supervisors, your leads, everybody who is back on property has to be part of this process. So I want to sort of compare and contrast the training as a process versus training as an event, and just kind of see how they can actually differ. So when I think of training as an event, this is kind of what I think of. I think of sometimes we're drinking from a fire hose, right? And I've been involved in a lot of places where people will say, hey, you've got everybody there for 2 hours. Can you just put this other thing in there? Can you just talk about this thing also for 15 minutes? Oh, can you put this other thing in there? And, I think as Eric Beard said the other day, we're a mile wide, but only an inch deep, which means that we've got so much information that we're throwing at people that they're not going to be able to absorb it. And in fact, when you think about trying to drink from a fire hose, you miss something, right? You're certainly going to be overwhelmed. And quite frankly, it's going to hurt. Right? So that's not how we want our trainings to be. But sometimes when we look specifically at a training event, we feel like we have to put all this stuff in there. Well, what I really want to encourage you to do, especially now, especially as we're bringing back people to help us get reopened and relaunch our business, I really want us to look at this more as a drip process, right? If you have the stopper in your sink, eventually, even with the drip, your sink is going to fill up. If you equate that to an employee, if you are dripping little things out to them, then eventually their mind is going to fill up with great information. Their skills are you're going to be able to build on the skills that they have. And really think about too, the learning process. So, we look at this from a training process. This is us training them, but how are they actually learning? When you think about how you've learned things over the years, you haven't learned things like that. Right? Think about driving a car. You didn't get into a car right away and know exactly how to drive as well as you drive now. The same thing is true with coming back and feeling comfortable with new procedures. The same thing is true with running a ride or running a POS system. This process, as we feed little things to people, little bite-sized nuggets, it really helps them absorb everything that we're teaching them and then be able to build on it. You learn one thing over here, and then you learn one thing over here, and then over time you see that there's a connection. You connect the dots and you're able to see how those two things relate, and then you have a stronger idea of the entire process. So really think about, as we're talking about the training process, what that looks like from a learner's perspective. This is not just about us training someone. We have to be even more concerned than we ever have been before about people learning something. So I wanted to kind of put that out there as a big picture process. Training is a process, not just an event. And I think that's more critical now than it ever has been before. So let's talk specifically about what that training process is. Now, I know there's a lot of great trainers on the call today, people that make their living just like I do, training other people, and you might see their training process and you might see some different words, but I would imagine that the steps, the elements of that training process are very similar, no matter who you're talking to, whether it's IRT or Ellis or myself or anybody. They have this kind of a similar process. So I wanted to kind of go over what my process is. And I really want you to think about all the things that you guys say are challenges and how they fit into that process. And then we'll give you a way to fill in the blanks of what should go in that process. So we've got a couple of processes that we're going to go through related to this training process. So the first step, of course, in the training process is to transfer the knowledge. So many of you, if you've been working at your facility or you've been working on things and you've been looking at the CDC recommendations and you've been looking at what's going on in your particular locale, what's going on. You've got that knowledge in your head. Well, that knowledge has to in some way transfer to your team members. It has to transfer to your managers that you're just bringing on, or your supervisors, or your leads, or your frontline employees. You could have knowledge that's in your manuals. That's got to get transferred. You may have knowledge if you do e-learning. You've got apps, you've got computer-based training. That knowledge has to transfer to the individual, because we don't do anything without that knowledge. So we've got to be able to transfer the knowledge to people so that they can actually perform the task. Now, what opportunities do we have right now that we could start transferring the knowledge? Well, depending on the situation that you have with your team members, if you're in communication with them, you can start this transfer of knowledge right now, even if they're not on property. You can start transferring the knowledge. Here's what we're expecting for our employees. Here's what we're expecting from our guests. Start sort of dripping that out to them so that they have that, so that when they come on board, when they come on property, this is not new information. They already know they're going to have to wear a mask. They already know that they're going to, have to do something a little different, because you've already started transferring that knowledge. And then it's about building the skill. So excuse me. So I would encourage you to, in whatever way you can to start transferring that knowledge now, that's going to give you a leg up down the road. Now, I know one of the challenges of that, of course, is that what is the knowledge today may not be the knowledge when it comes time to open. And I think that's one of the things that we have to prepare our team. We know that, right? We know that it may not be the same, but here's where we are today. Could be the messaging. It could be different. Be ready for that new message. But here's where we are today. We may send you something out a little bit later, right? I know some people are maybe a little hesitant to start sending it out too early, but I honestly don't believe that you can send it out too early, right? That helps people not only be ready for what's coming, but it also prepares them. If there is a change, they knew a change might be coming, right? The one benefit I think we have to all of this is that we're all going through this together. We've heard that so many times, that they see as well as we do that things are changing daily, right? That the CDC recommendations might change from week to week, or what the government is saying might change from week to week. So part of this transfer of knowledge is the knowledge that things might change, right? So the big picture, though, is that for the training process, transferring knowledge from wherever it is to that person, that's really the first step. The second step to me is about skill practice. So once they have the knowledge, once they have sort of a foundation of what they're supposed to be doing, now it's time to get them in there and get them practicing. Whether they're making a funnel cake or running a POS system or they're running a ride, now is the time to skill practice. Think about the new things that your teams are going to be doing. They're going to be maybe, wiping down a ride every other cycle or something, or they're going to be talking to people with a mask on. Oh my goodness. All right. So now the way that we communicate with people has changed, right? The facial expressions, a smile through a mask, you can kind of see it in your eyes, but you can't see it as well, through the mask. One of the folks I was talking to the other day said, maybe for the skill practice for communicating, we need to teach our team members, running a ride or making a funnel cake, to communicate more like a costume character, right? Because they use their whole body. There's a lot of body language going on there, and they can communicate things that are not just with your face, right? Because if you're in a costume, you don't have your face to use to convey a message. So what does that skill practice look like? When I think about when I was running rides and things, there were times when my trainer had a lot of time to practice with me. There was times when they didn't have a lot of times to practice with me. And I always felt more confident, and this is going to be no surprise to anybody on the call today. I always felt more confident when I had more skill practice, and not when they said, oh, I got to go to this other thing. You'll be all right, right? So we have to give people time to practice the skill. Practice can make perfect. Practice can make us more confident. But to me, there's also another step to this, which is skill mastery, right? And to me, skill mastery takes place over time. So skill practice might be that first day. And I'll just use running a ride as an example. That first day running a ride, and you're still a little nervous and you're not exactly sure, but your trainer is there to help answer questions. But as you do it day after day, and as it becomes more of a habit, now you start to master it. Now you start to be really confident in what you're doing. And now we can start sort of layering in other things that are on top of that, maybe little tricks and tips, or maybe layering in guest service. As you start to master certain things, now you can again layer in other avenues or other elements that they can use to be even better at their job. So skill mastery takes a little bit longer. This is where I also think we have an opportunity right now, because we potentially have an opportunity where part of our facility might not open right away, right? And whether that's because it's just not ready, or because we don't have the staff, or we don't feel like we're going to have the guest need, or maybe we don't have that particular area ready for distancing or whatever, right? You can do a soft opening, so that you have family and friends coming in, but you could also have that area that's kind of off to the side, that's not quite open yet, but that's maybe where your area is, where your team members are trying to master their craft, if you will. right? So keeping that closed for your guests, but using it for training so that they can be over there and spend a little bit more time. This is kind of where I talk a little bit about elongating the training. So if you have people that are working the front lines for people for when your facility does open, and then you've got some other areas where you can kind of continue the training and allow people to get even more comfortable and more mastering of that particular skill, then you've got a better chance of them being really productive when the guests arrive. And I know that this is easy for me to say, sitting in my home office in North Carolina, and you all are out there and you've got, places to open, and you've got people, talking to you about, we got to open these things and do these kind of things. But I would really, if you're really concerned about the consistency and you're concerned about, accountability, then elongating this process and doing it a little bit more like that dripping faucet is really going to serve you better in the long run. So once we sort of have allowed them to practice the skill and master it, it's also time to evaluate it. And of course, you're going to evaluate it as you go, but there's lots of great ways that you can evaluate the training that you've done. Certainly internal observations and audits to kind of walk around and see how people are doing. You can evaluate by giving an assessment, a knowledge assessment. How much do you know, and do you have the right knowledge? You can assess by peer observations and what are people doing. You can also assess by having outside folks do audits. We have Eric Beard from International Ride Training. They do a great job of evaluating how people are doing based on their criteria. I think Rat Carroll from Ellis was signed up. I don't know if he's actually on the call, but Ellis and Associates for lifeguards do a great job, and Red Cross does a great job of evaluating sort of from a third party perspective how your folks are doing. Amusement Advantage does an amazing job of mystery shopping. So that's a great way to evaluate, again, from a non-biased third party, how your training is actually being received. And each one of those companies, and certainly you can do this internally, you can develop your criteria. So if you've got a new procedure that you want people to be abiding by, then that's the criteria upon which that company or the internal audit should evaluate, right? So make sure that evaluation lines up to those new things that you're training on. And if it's not happening, this is where you go back and say, okay, do you have the knowledge? Were you able to practice well enough? Did you master this? Right? And if those things are not being shown in the evaluation, then you can go back and see where the gap in that process is. The last part of this, of course, is follow-up. And when we follow back up with a team member, or we follow back up with a manager in an area, this is about kind of communicating what we've done during this process so that we know which parts worked, maybe which parts didn't. Follow up with that team member and say, hey, we saw you do this, we saw you do that, here's what we evaluated. And now we give them the opportunity to either improve what they've done, or if they're doing really well, then great, kudos, keep up the great work. But that's also part of this process. Now, I will be honest with you, being someone that's from the industry, I think we do some of these really well. I think some companies have a really good handle on this whole process. I think where a lot of folks are that I've seen is you're pretty good at transferring the knowledge, you're pretty good at the skill practice, and then the rest of these things may or may not happen. They may happen in the beginning of the season, right? So when it's when things are fresh, right? You're practicing these things and making sure they're happening. It may not happen toward the middle or end if you're a seasonal business. So that's one thing that I would really encourage you to think about is, how do we bring back in these practices, these processes, toward the middle and end of the season. If that's something that you have been a little weak on, how do you bring those back in? Because ultimately, when we talk about consistency, when we talk about accountability, this is really where that is, right? If you just transfer knowledge and you allow people to skill practice, but you never evaluate and you never follow up, you've got no accountability whatsoever, right? They could be doing who knows what, right? And then you walk by one day and they're just doing something that where did that come from? Well, you didn't allow them to master the skill, you didn't evaluate it, and you didn't follow up with them, right? So this process is really designed to not only train them on a skill, have them learn the skill, but also to follow up to make sure that they're doing it on a consistent basis and what they should be doing down the road. So that training process, to me, again, if we only look at this as an event, none of these things happen, right? We don't consider all these different angles of the actual process. So that's why I want to take a look at the training process and really try to understand what all those steps are so that we can make sure that whether we're, again, training people on, cleaning a ride or running a POS system, all these steps really should be in place. Now, here's the big question. How do you know what to do in each one of these steps, right? How do you know how to transfer the knowledge? How do you know what knowledge to transfer? How do you know how to let them skill practice? How long should we let them skill practice? How do we evaluate? How do we follow up? All those things are really, really great questions. And I want to share with you the method that I use whenever I'm doing any kind of training. Some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but it's really this process of what do people need to know? How do we want them to feel, and what do we want them to do? So this is sort of a pre-process to the training process, if you will. So we're working backwards a little bit, because when you think about the knowledge, the transfer of knowledge, we have to know what it is that we want people to know so that we can transfer that knowledge, right? So during this process, we really have to brainstorm and understand what is it that people need to know? What is that information that they need to know? How do we want them to feel? What are the emotions that we want them to feel? And specifically, what actions do we want them to take? What do we want them to do? Now, we're going to dive into these more specifically, and this is where we're going to do the breakout rooms, because I want you to brainstorm on what these will look like in your own facility. But real quick, again, like I talked about with the process, I noticed a lot of places are really good at the transfer of knowledge and the skill practice. I think a lot of places are pretty good here about the knowledge and the do part, right? I can train somebody how to make a funnel cake. I can train somebody how to run a ride. What we tend not to focus on enough, in my opinion, are the emotions. How do people feel about this process? How do people feel when they're running that ride? How do people feel during the training process? Are we just kind of running through things because we don't have any time and they're feeling rushed and they're feeling anxious? Or have we created an environment where they feel comfortable and they feel excited? So that's one of the things I really want to focus on when we get to that one is, what are those emotions that we want people to feel? Because we all know as human beings, we're driven by emotions, right? If you feel like you're drinking from the fire hose and you're overwhelmed, then guess what's not getting through? The knowledge that we're trying to transfer. So we have to be cognizant of how people are feeling during this process. Okay, so let's start off with the no. I don't know if we have any Seinfeld fans on the call today, but I know it's been off the air for a little while, so I'm showing my age a little bit. But one of my favorite lines from Seinfeld was from Newman, and he says, "When you control the mail, you control information." And you as a manager, you as a leader, you control the information. You control when that information goes out. You control how much information goes out. So the big question is, what knowledge or information do they need? We could even add to that, when do they need it, right? So if we're talking about the drip process, we're talking about getting little bits of information out to people now. What's the information they need now? What's the information that they might need later? Okay, so one of the things that I think is really important about what they know, obviously, are the sort of non-negotiables, like your park hours and height requirements if you're in rides, or your prices if you're in admissions. But I think it's also important that people know, especially about the new things, like am I going to be required to wear a mask? Do they need to know that? Do they need to know, am I going to be required to tell a guest that they have to put a mask on? And if so, what do I need to know about that process? And if they give me a hard time, what do I need to know about who to contact and how they're going to get over here? And all those things. There's so many little different intricacies that we need to focus on. That's why I want to take a little bit of time to brainstorm that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this. So I would love to hear at least from one or two groups about the things that you guys talked about in terms of what you want your team members to know. So if someone could volunteer just to talk us through that, you'll unmute yourself and we'll hear what you have to say. Thank you, Stacy from Knoebels. I appreciate that.
Really, what I stated in our little breakout session was that it seems like our greatest challenge to overcome would be the fact that we have segmented groups right now. So we have a group that was able to go through our typical rehire process prior to everything happening. And then we have another group that has done a strictly online version of it. And then we have a whole other group coming in that has gone through no rehire process or no hire process. So I think that what we will have the largest challenge will be trying to, I guess, fix the segmenting challenges that we have right now.
So you've probably got some things that you want people to know, but they all know different things at this point. Is that
correct?
Kind of
yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, appreciate that. Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah.
For going first, appreciate that. So let's hear from just one more group. What are some things that you need your teams to know? If you have specific examples, that would be fantastic that we can tag on to here.
I can go.
Go for it.
So I'm sure everybody's got the same things on their list, but obviously health screening and what to expect when they come on property, what they're going to be faced with, any changes in chemicals, cleaning procedures, what specifically they'll need to do. We talked about possibly protocol changes versus if it was a rehire and they're learning something new, that if you've changed your program from last year. And then we talked a lot about PPE and the various types of PPE, and it sounds like everyone has different choices, and making sure that everyone's clear on, depending on which department and what role they have, that they have the correct PPE for use.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate that. So a lot of things in there about sort of the new things that you need people to be aware of, and certainly from an employee standpoint, what is their how is this going to affect them, right? So I think it's great that you have those in there. So let's then, now that we kind of have a list of, or at least are thinking about the things that our team members need to know, now it's time to go on and think about what are those things, or how do we want our team members to feel, right? And what are those emotions that you want them to feel? And really thinking about it in a couple of different ways. How do you want them to feel about, during, or after the training, right? Because you want them to feel a certain way while they're going through it. You probably want them to feel excited, but then afterwards, you want them to feel confident in what they're doing. You want them to feel like they matter. You want them to feel like they are supported. So I'm going to do the same thing. We'll do another breakout. Now, I think you'll be in the same breakout with the same people, but you may not be, so that'll be fun. But we'll put you in the breakouts again for another couple of minutes. And now I just want you to think about specifically, how do you want your team members to feel? What are those emotions that are going to be important for them to be able to be productive and confident in what they're doing? Okay, so let's go back to the breakouts, open all rooms. All right, so I was able to pop into another couple of discussions and heard a lot of great things. Actually, Chandler from Holiday World, there's something I'd like you to share. You were talking about how you want them to feel about coming back to your facility, like it's still like the same park that they were at before. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I mean, there's just a lot of different things right now. It's obviously, like you said in that graphic at the beginning, it was, the biggest word on there was new, but these aren't new. This isn't a new park. It's not the people working here, this isn't all of our first day on the job. It's not all of our, we all want to, make sure everybody comes back again the next year. It's the same people that we worked with years before. It's people, I guess, we kind of trust. We've always trusted that we're doing the right thing for the safety. I mean, I don't know. That's not a new thing. Keeping our employees safe, that's not something new that we've just started this year. It's something we've been doing before. It's something we've always done. It's the same people who have always looked out for their safety. And I kind of want to, I think it's very important that we keep that going for our employees, that familiarity with everybody. It's, there's a lot of dangerous things in our industry. There's a lot of ways people could get hurt, could get sick, anything like that. This is just a new one, and it's something that I think we can take care of.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. I do appreciate that. I know there's a lot of other discussions, but just in the interest of time, I want to make sure we get to all of these. But Chandler, thank you for that, because I think that's one thing that we may not think of all the time. We want them to feel confident about their job, but do we want them to feel like this hasn't changed all that much, right? It's still the same place that you're coming back to. It's still the warm, homey feeling of coming back, because we all know that the majority of reason that we're all in this industry and we've been in it for so long is because of the people. Right. And so we want that element to kind of stay the same. So Chandler, I appreciate you sharing that. So that brings us to the last part, which is the do, right? These are the actions. What specific actions do you need them to take? Again, do you need them to be the mask police? Do you need them as an employee to stay socially distant or physically distant from another employee? So what are those specific actions that you need them to take? We'll do the breakout room one more time, and we'll get some conversation going about that. So here we go back to the breakout rooms to talk about what specifically we need people to do. Okay, it looks like everybody is back. This is fantastic. So I asked Megan Campbell from her group to kind of talk a little bit about what they were talking about that they want their team members to do.
So we do need them to follow the specific instructions that we provide to them, but we also do need them to communicate if those specific instructions aren't working when we get to the reality of an open operation, to communicate back of what does and doesn't work.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because, when we think about our plan, we could think about the best plan, but it's not going to matter when the guests get there if things don't work, right? So we absolutely have to think about that. And Dino Fazio from Maury's was kind of talking about that same thing. He said, we've got this plan, what we think it's going to be, and then when the guests get there, it's going to be maybe something completely different. So we definitely need a lot of communication through that process, and also thinking about how we adjust through that as well, I think is going to be really, really important. So thank you all very much for experimenting with the breakout rooms. What do you guys think? Was that fun? Was that cool? Thumbs up. Fantastic. Awesome sauce. All right. So let's go back to sharing, and we'll kind of bring this back together. So, we've talked a lot about the process of training. We've talked a lot about, the difference between training a process and an event. We've talked about the actual training process that I typically use. But now it's really time to ask these tough questions, right? And this is an opportunity for you to go back through some of those things that you say, this is what we want our team members to know. This is how we want them to feel. These are the things we want them to do. Because then if you look at the bottom of this slide, it talks about this is what we must do to make that happen, right? So if we want them, if you think about, what Chandler was talking about, if we want them to feel like this is a welcome place, then we must do something. We must make them feel welcome, right? We must welcome them back with open arms. We must make them feel comfortable. So those are the kind of lasting thoughts that I would like you to kind of think about as you go back and kind of apply this to your own process is, if we want them to do something, if we want them to feel a certain way, if we want them to know something, then what do we have to do, right? Because ultimately this comes back to us. Right? What is it that we have to do? So when you look through this process, you say, we want them to know about masks, or we want them to know about the new cleaning process. So what do we have to do? We have to teach them about that, right? And then if we want them to feel confident about it, we can't just show them a slide on an e-learning platform and say, this is the new chemical, right? We have to show them the model. We have to tell them how to use it. We have to show them the right way to use it. We have to get them comfortable with using that in the way that we want them to use it. So this training process is not just about, giving people information, but it's also about helping them learn and making sure that they have the comfort level to be able to do this on an ongoing basis. Okay. All right. So with that, we'll come back to our graphic of those things that we wanted to talk about, and just kind of recap some of the things that we talked about. Definitely, there's a lot of new stuff out there, whether it's around hand sanitizer or masks or distancing, and those things I don't think we should be afraid of, because we all have a good idea of what training really looks like and how we can train people to do that. So then it just comes back to understanding the training process the fact that it is a process, and also, what is it that you want your team members to know? The big one, how do we want them to feel, and specifically, what do we want them to do? And if we focus on that, and we can focus on, even in some cases, elongating our training, then I think we have a great shot at making this very successful. So real quick, is David Crandall still on the call with us today?
Yes, I am.
Fantastic. David's operation is open, and I wanted him to just take a minute, because we just have a minute, David, just to take a minute about some of the things that you found and you learned about getting your team members ready for that reopening.
For one thing, it was when we started our training, we conducted a 4-hour training the day before we opened with our frontline cashiers, attendants, and part of our management team. The first 15 minutes was like the first day of high school. Everybody was excited to see each other again, which was fantastic, and they were all sharing stories. So I had to calm them down a little bit and get them on track. But we started out with essentially a training that was there when they come into the park, clocking in, what their clock-in procedure was going to be like, all the way to getting to their shift, where they were going to be scheduled to. And then we also included, as a group, the entire team, a walk around the facility for each position, so that a cashier knew what the responsibilities of a raceway attendant was going to be, and a skating rink attendant knew what a golf attendant was going to be doing, just so that everybody knew what everybody's responsibilities were, and they could work together as a team to fulfill those goals of providing a safe, confident experience for the guests.
Excellent. Thank you, David. I appreciate that. David, are you okay if people reach out and ask you more questions about that?
Yeah,
okay.
You can send me an email.
Fantastic. And just a shameless plug, David just did a video for the Attraction Pros COVID-19 video series where he outlined that even more. So please feel free to tune into that. With that, we will wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for being a part of this today, and I hope you got a lot of good information out of it. And again, whether you're teaching someone how to make a bowl of spaghetti, or you're teaching them about your new process, the training process itself is the same, but we also have to focus on how people feel about it now more than ever. So again, thank you. If you have other questions, if there's anything I can help you with in the future, please feel free to let me know. My email is up there. That is my cell phone number. Please feel free to call or text anytime. I'm still doing the free 30-minute calls. A number of you have been on those calls, and those have been fantastic. Also the Facebook All Clear group, a lot of you are in that group as well. If you're not in that group, let me know. I can certainly send you a link. Some socially distant ways to educate your teams are some of our books. And, I'm partial to 2 books, The Myth of Employee Burnout and All Clear, a practical guide for first-time leaders and the people who support them. If you have a need or a desire to look at those books, just let me know. I already mentioned the Attraction Pros podcast, and I'm also starting to do more online workshops and really look at that as a way to pivot my business. So I'm going to be offering one here in the future, and I'll send everybody a link to that so that you can take part in that if you so choose. So I'm happy to stay on the call if anybody has any questions. I want to be respectful of your time, though. If you need to run to another Zoom call, fantastic. I hope you have a great day, and I hope you all stay safe and stay well, and we'll see you all soon. So feel free.